They're breaking down fat, but there's a lot of now high fatty acid in their blood, and it's not able, the body, mitochondria is not able to use that for energy. So it's like
for diabetic patients.
Yes, a physiology conflict in which is like a lot of fuel, fatty acid in the blood and high glucose in the blood, but still the mitochondria is not able to use that fuel.
So it's not very often I get to have two scientists sitting across from me. So this is pretty cool. So Doctors Merav and Michal Mor, I want to talk about how to know when we are burning fat versus burning carbs for energy, and like what kind of things we notice in the human body, but more so getting down into mechanistic detail, like what is happening? What is happening when we burn fat?
Okay, this is a good question to start with. So maybe one step back is, what is burning fat, burning carbs? What is it? Who is doing the job, right? So eventually, who is burning carbs versus fat? Those are our mitochondria. And the health of our mitochondria determines the health of our metabolism. Metabolism is like a very big word that basically say our body engine. And as an engine, our body can use fat, carbs, and some ratio in between. So to your question, a healthy metabolism should know to use both fat and carbs, and it's very dependent on the context. So a healthy metabolism, a healthy mitochondria will shift to burn fat when we are in fasting, resting, and long distance endurance workout, versus it will shift to use more carbs when we have high energy availability, for example, after eating a bowl of pasta, and when we have high energy demand, for example, during workout. So in that time, cortisol, which is a hormone, a stress hormone, increase, and it signals our mitochondria now to use more carbs. Why? Because carbs are not require oxygen. So at that time, our mitochondria will use mostly carbs in order to have the energy that our body needs. But when cortisol is chronically high, so our mitochondria all the time will use carbs, what will make it weaker? It will produce more oxidative stress. It will damage the membrane of the mitochondria. We will have less mitochondria will become less metabolically healthy, and eventually we'll be able to less burning fat and carbs. So basically we want to see fat burn when we are, for example, wake up in the morning after an overnight shift, and when we are in a long distance endurance. So the more you are metabolically fit, the more you are in the fitness, you are more fit. It means that you are able to use fat when your heart rate is although your heart rate is increased. So, for example, if Meravi...
Now I'm resting, doing nothing but listening to you.
It depends how you are listening. Are you in a performance mode? Are you trying to perform? For example, the way I am now, right? I'm trying to perform. So cortisol is high, and my mitochondria will now measure my metabolism. You will see that I'm burning probably mostly carbs.
Just maybe we'll go backward. So measuring metabolism, this is something that traditional devices starts on the 60. And the principle of measuring metabolism, the type of fuel our body is using, based on few key elements. Our mitochondria takes either fat or carbs, burn it, oxidize it, using oxygen. And while the mitochondria produce energy in the form of ATP, she actually releases carbon dioxide. And the traditional method to measure on what type of fuel our body is using, actually measure what is the oxygen consumption and what is the carbon dioxide production. And the ratio between the carbon dioxide we produce to the oxygen we consume can tell us what type of fuel our body actually used, carbs or fat, or a ratio in between. It usually ranges between 0.7 to 1, a little bit above 1. It can be also a little bit below 0.7.
So even when we are completely glycolytic, like we're sprinting 100% all-out effort, there's still a certain level of aerobic metabolism that is also happening in other areas of the body? So there's no carbon dioxide production from carbohydrate metabolism, correct? Like it's purely anaerobic without oxygen. So is there actually a little bit of carbon dioxide production even with carbohydrate metabolism?
Yes, there is, but now it really depends on the ratio. If you only produce energy from carbohydrate, so the ratio between carbon dioxide to oxygen is 1. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you do not produce carbon dioxide. It just depends on the ratio between.
It even means that you produce more carbon dioxide. I mean, when the chemical equation, when your mitochondria is using carbs, it produces more carbon dioxide versus when it's using fat. So the main principle behind how Lumen, for example, is working is by measuring the carbon dioxide in your exhale air. So when we see that you are releasing more carbon dioxide, it means that your mitochondria is using more carbs. And when we see that you produce less carbon dioxide, but still you produce carbon dioxide, it means that your mitochondria is using more fat. But because in a regular breathing, if now, for example, you will measure the carbon dioxide in a normal breath, when I'm using fat versus carbs, you won't see any different. Why? Because when my body produces more carbon dioxide, the way our body is working in order to get to release that carbon dioxide from the blood is by increasing the ventilation rate. So the principle, the hack, right, that Meravi and I invent is by holding a breathing holding technique. So by asking users to inhale a specific amount of air, hold their breath for 10 seconds, and then exhale. And that time, the carbon dioxide in the blood reached to equilibrium with the air in the lungs. And now when I'm exhale, and you will measure the carbon dioxide in my exhale air, it basically represents what is happening in the blood. So basically, it's much more similar to the way it was used to measure metabolism before
indirect calorimetry.
Indirect calorimetry before, it wasn't allowed to do different tests in human, because it's like you need to measure the artery and the vein, and you need
I want maybe just to summarize, okay?
No, this is cool.
Yeah. So there's direct measurement.
You're afraid we are losing them.
Every time Michal and I can speak about science, but many times our head goes into a million directions. So sometimes each one of us stop trying to summarize.
People that watch this channel are very familiar with that, so you're fine.
Okay, perfect.
A question in terms of CO2 tolerance and actually impacting on the brain, for example, right? Like certain degrees of being able to do breath holds and whatnot can increase your CO2 tolerance. So can that skew the reading if someone has a high CO2 tolerance and is able to maybe expend or go at a high anaerobic capacity and then hold their breath for 10 seconds, whereas someone that maybe is out of shape couldn't hold their breath for 10 seconds because they haven't been augmented the CO2 reception?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think it will interrupt the measurement, because we need to separate between what we produce to what our brain is sensitive to. Okay, so if, for example, I want to take to do swimming, like this pool, and without breathe, the technique these, for example, diving will do, they will practice what you just mentioned. So I will inhale, stop my breath more and more and more. Eventually, what my brain will what will happen is that the sensitivity to carbon dioxide will reduce. So I wouldn't get out of the water and say, I have to take a breath, I have to breathe. Okay, but it doesn't mean that my body will produce less or more carbon dioxide. But if I'll do, for example, a lot of hyperventilation before taking a lumen measurement, or even getting into a traditional metabolic cart, then it might interfere with the measurement, because the basic that the measurement based on is exactly this. So we do need to take it not following hyperventilation or something.
Got it. So is there a larger byproduct of something else when we're in aerobic metabolism or more beta oxidation? So with carbohydrates, there's a higher amount of carbon dioxide, and with aerobic activity, there's a lower amount. But is there a trade-off? Is there a different byproduct that's produced through beta oxidation that we're not necessarily measuring? I'm just curious.
So when you are using ketones, for example, right? I mean, our mitochondria use fat, carbs, and ketone bodies. So in that time, the byproduct is acetone in your breath. So, for example, now we're working on integrate acetone exactly for that, for Lumen, in order to give better insight around how deep someone is in fat burn. Because carbon dioxide can give you the ratio momentarily mitochondria fuel between carbs and fat, but it's not giving you how deep you are in fat burn.
By the way, this is one of the issues with traditional tools for measuring metabolism, because when you are in a ketogenic state, you also produce carbon dioxide, and we just mentioned that the technique based on the ratio between carbon dioxide to oxygen. So, like the traditional measurement might mistake and say, oh, I notice a higher carbon dioxide. This subject, for example, tend to use carbohydrate, but it's not because of carbohydrate oxidation versus keto bodies. And this is one of the errors we currently have in traditional tools to measure metabolism. Not many know it, but it's very, very interesting.
Does that additional carbon dioxide that's produced in a ketogenic state, is that just as a result of gluconeogenesis and more kind of just different substrates being utilized? So even though you're in a fat-burning state and you're utilizing ketones, you're having an increased rate of gluconeogenesis and ultimately so you're producing a level of, peripheral insulin resistance and peripheral sort of glucose. Is that what's deterring that? So it's still ultimately carbohydrates, it's just skewing the data.
So there are two reasons. Yeah. One is when mitochondria is using ketone bodies and it produces ATP, it also in that chemical equation, it releases also more carbon dioxide. What you're saying, and this is what I just wanted to add, when we are, for example, breaking down muscles and we convert them into glucose, and now the mitochondria is using that in order to produce energy, you will see also a high carbon dioxide. So you will say, okay, that person is burning mostly carbs. But the reason behind it, it's not because I have a lot of, my glycogen is full with carbs and I tend to use them. It might be because my glycogen is super depleted, getting into a critical level in which the body is now going to muscles, breaking them, convert them into glucose. One of the main problems, for example, with during menopause, premenopause, is that women are much more sensitive to muscle breakdown. So we need to be very careful, and we need to recognize that now they are using carbs not because they ate way too much carbs or not because they didn't move enough. It's because they don't have enough carbs in the system. And at that moment, we should recommend to consume more carbs in order to avoid the muscle breakdown, consume more protein. So it's like it's the same reading, but the insight behind it, it's so different that the recommendation will be completely different.
Like in intermittent fasting, you also are able to see it. Yeah. Right, intermittent fasting, one of the greatest tools. We can talk about what exactly it does and how it helps you, but it's also something you should manage because of what Michaly just mentioned, because you have to do it also in a healthy way. Otherwise, you will break muscle and you get like the opposite results from what you intend to do.
The main problems when people are taking GLP-1, muscle breakdown. I mean, they're not eating enough, they lose weight, but they're also breaking down muscles, and their metabolism is getting worse instead of getting better.
So, because, in our muscles, we have is packed with mitochondria. So the moment we actually break down our muscles, we lose the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of our body. And then our metabolism will get worse, or metabolic flexibility will significantly decrease.
What about, how do you factor in, for example, someone that is deep in a ketogenic state or deep into a fast, and there's arguably a good amount of glycerol that is broken down into gluconeogenesis as well. Depending how fat adapted somebody is, they're going to become more muscle sparing. Mm-hmm. They're going to have less chance of breaking down muscle via gluconeogenesis, and it's going to be much more so, the glycerol backbone. So that's obviously going to contribute to a higher carbon dioxide reading, even though it's not necessarily the same as for like someone that's not fat adapted. So it sounds like by factoring in acetone, you could balance this ratio
The
out.
third dimension. Yeah.
Merav gave the acetone a name, which is the third dimension. So this is why
because
she
it
is super
is.
exciting. But what you just said, I mean, the way Meravi and I comes from, we did compete in Ironman competition. So the main strategy for us was to improve our mitochondria ability to use fat to produce energy. So we brought ourselves into a very low glycogen level in order to improve our ability to use glycerol and beta and ketones body in order to produce energy. So it will give us the advantages during long endurance sessions to spare the glycogen, the carbs, and then to use them only when we needed them the most. For example, when we need to climb the mountain, or to pass someone in.
I mean, you're describing
just to pass someone.
I guess that's a good way to take it.
That's nice. It's a good feeling.
No, it is, and it's exactly.
Yeah, very competitive.
It's how I have often described. Using literally that analogy to describe metabolic flexibility. It's the ability to, and at the same vein, when you get to the top of the hill, to be able to switch back, right?
Exactly.
You're not going into serious oxygen debt because you have the ability to substrate switch and be fat adapted enough so that once you do reach the top of the hill, while everyone else is gassed and it's taking them 30, 60, 120 seconds to get back into beta oxidation, you're able to flip, really quick, which is where, it's interesting to be able to, like, have you tried testing your alveolar error, testing like literally intra-exercise? Like, can you get down to that granular? Or, because sometimes what I found is like back in the old days of even testing ketones with my blood and things like that, it was almost a moot point to test intra-exercise because things would get so disrupted, right? I would almost never register ketones during a high intensity workout, no matter how fasted I was. It's like you would immediately kick into some kind of sympathetic overdrive where you would, but I'm curious, like, have you tested, like, just in that situation, like with Lumen being like running up a hill and then how long it takes you to come back?
I wish at that time, it was like 2011, Lumen did not existed yet.
But now you're running.
Yeah, but now we do try. First of all, now we... Why are you laughing?
Because I know how much you enjoy now to answer that question. I can see that.
Because until now, Lumen you can use Lumen only in resting state. So Lumen currently we track after metabolic state by following the carbon dioxide, right, in exhale breath. But you can use Lumen only in resting state because we do not have, for example, an oxygen sensor in the device. But what we are currently developing is how our users will be able to use the Lumen while doing exercise. So Lumen does a lot of research collaborations all over the world. And one of the collaboration we are now doing is to see how we can correlate the Lumen measurement together with fat max and lactate threshold. So exactly for this amazing, I think, segment of people who really want to improve their athletic performance. And also something that I think is about to be talked more is fat max as a metric that you should track, not only if you want to improve your athletic performance, but also if you want to improve your health. So we're familiar with VO2 max, right? But if, for example, you'll take our dad who passed away like 3 years ago from diabetic, he was in high BMI, and you would ask him to do a VO2 max test, no chance he would be able to follow this test. And fat max is actually very, very similar in a way, although it enable, I think, a larger population, people who needed this metric for health issues, and
not only for athletes.
And then you can track it, and you can improve your health by improving your fat max threshold.
Can you describe, just for people that may not be aware of, like, what your fat max is?
Fat max is actually, think of it, how intense my exercise, I can do my exercise and still burning fat. Okay, the more I'm in a fitness state, I can do high intense and still burning fat. The moment my body will require higher energy demand, and the oxygen I can provide to my body, will be enough to oxidize fat. My body will continue fat. The moment I will need more energy, more oxygen, then my body will shift into carbs because it will feel like more difficult to use fat to produce this energy. And this is the moment actually that our body will shift into carbohydrate. Now, many times you want to do exercise while you're below your fat max because you want to optimize your fat oxidation. And there's a lot of health benefits to do so.
Now, as Merav mentioned, it's not only for athletes. So people that are have the metabolic disorders, it means that they are not able to use fat properly. So it's like they are stuck in the middle. From one side, they're not able to use fat. From the other side, they're not really able to use carbs because the insulin insensitivity. Yeah. So they're really stuck.
Yeah, I call that metabolic purgatory.
I like the name.
Yeah. You're stuck in that gray area where it's...
One of the things we tried to test is on Lumen. Lumen has about 75 million metabolic measurements, and we have it in the context. So all the time we go...
Just before Lumen, it was in the world less than 1 million. So it's like we are the big database for metabolic measurement.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's great because then we can explore metabolism and generate and take insights out of the data. And one of the things, following on what Michaly just mentioned about people who stuck, we said, okay, let's take a look if there's any correlation between BMI and the ability to use carbohydrate following carbohydrate meals. Okay, so, and what we are able to see is that the higher the BMI is, you are less flexible. Means, okay, you are unable to do this shift into carbs oxidation. So then what happens with the carb that I just ate? It's stuck for longer in the bloodstream. And then in time, we will develop diabetes. So it's very nice to see what we are talking about in the data.
And we will convert those extra carbs into body fat. So we will much more easily will gain fat. So if I would like to simplify that, so I can say that someone that is more metabolically flexible can allow himself to eat more carbs and not gaining weight from that.
Because he use it for immediate energy instead of store it.
What's interesting there is that would lead initially to the layperson, lead them to believe that, okay, well, they're inefficient at using carbs, so they must be in a state of beta oxidation all the time. But that's not the case either, right? You become very kind of inefficient at both. So it's like, okay, well, yeah, you're having a hard time using carbs. Well, that's fine. Then at least you're using fats. But no, you're not. You're stuck in the middle. And you're basically using an inefficient process for both.
It's like their cells experience starvation because their body is not able to use fat, but also not able to use carbs. So it's like they're breaking down fat, but there's a lot of now high fatty acid in their blood, and it's not able, the body, mitochondria is not able to use that for energy. So it's like,
for diabetic patients.
Yes, a physiology conflict in which there's a lot of fuel, fatty acid in the blood and high glucose in the blood, but still the mitochondria is not able to use that fuel. It's it's a sad situation.
I want to hug this mitochondria.
I want to hug the mitochondria in that state. It's it's all over, but she can get it.
Yeah, and then you're left with, just...
The mitochondria is a hero. Yeah. I literally believe in it.
No, I think that's what we're seeing all the way down, so many different, metabolic theories of disease and everything now that are starting to come to light, and we're starting to understand so many more dynamics to just overall health and disease that we never really realized before. And then of course when you have the cell unable to utilize a fuel substrate, then you're constantly in, a fight or flight mode all the time. So you have then increases in visceral fat. Just it goes on and on and on and on with that.
You talked about endurance, but this stuff you just mentioned, we can control it not only by doing to do more exercise, right? If we are all the time in continuous stress mode, if we do not get enough sleep, and of course nutrition, it all comes down eventually to our metabolism and affect it.
I think today people tend to think that it's all around nutrition. It's like they're all the time barking under the tree of nutrition.
Yeah.
But there are so much more. It's about how we sleep. It's about how stressed we are, which is one of the main problems of today. Stress is not getting enough sleep. Those are two major factors.
33% of adult Americans suffer from insufficient sleep. This is huge.
Yes, and
75 from...
Oh, wow, you're super strong with the numbers.
You know me.
I know you. I don't know why I'm surprised. You surprise me every time.
Has a really, self-reported that they have like kind of depression, mild to high depression, 75%.
And when we are not getting enough sleep, it's messed up with our circadian rhythm. And our circadian rhythm is like an internal clock that is signal to our mitochondria when it's time to rest and when it's time to produce energy. So when we are not getting enough sleep, our mitochondria is now getting conflict signals. So instead of rest during the night and repair itself and fix all the enzymes and all the membrane and take care of itself, she's now busy and producing energy. So this is something that will happen when we are not getting enough sleep or when we are, for example, eating late at night.
Or night shift.
So everything it's a mess for her. And then when she wake up in the morning, it's a she. Then when she wake up in the morning, it's like she's tired because she didn't rest during the night. So it's like...
we have several collaborations, but one of the interesting stuff is now we do it with Colorado University. So they examine how night shifts can affect metabolic state. And we don't have the results yet, but it's very, very interesting. And I think in US, there's a lot of night shifts.
Yeah.
And it's...
anecdotally, without the research, what have you seen in terms of, even for a healthy individual with, a poor night of sleep, what does the data show, or what have you seen? What does that do to carb or fat metabolism? Do you see a shift towards much more carb metabolism, even in a healthy individual?
Yeah, so we just ran an experiment in our community. We asked them to measure their metabolism before going to bed and when they wake up in the morning. So as we mentioned earlier in our conversation, a healthy mitochondria should burn fat during resting and fasting. Meaning when I wake up in the morning, my mitochondria should use fat. So we track after those two measurements and we ask them to follow the shift between those two measurements when they are stop eating earlier, and the second when they are avoiding screen before going to bed. And we saw how the before bed measurement, they now go to bed with less on carb burn, still on carb burn, but not 100% carbs, around 75. And they do a better shift from carbs into fat. So they now wake up much more in fat burn. So by seeing how those two behavioral change affect the metabolism. First of all, for them, it's like when you really, we all the time, we know what is healthy, right? We know it's not good to eat at night. We know we need to sleep. We know we need to be less with the phone. But when you actually able to measure and to validate the impact and see how big is the impact for you, it's really helping people to change their behavior.
Totally.
So it's like it was a cool experiment.
Do you find, if someone is measuring and they see that they're in a fat burning state, do you typically encourage people, hey, capitalize on this, and this is when you should go do some low intensity activity and capitalize on this? And the contrary with, say, carbohydrates. If you were to measure and say, okay, I'm utilizing carbohydrates, that seems logical that would be the time that you'd say, hey, maybe I want to go do more resistance training or high intensity interval training. Have you seen that sort of stack up with performance outcomes, to people that are more performance minded, not necessarily just from a body composition perspective, where yes, it would make sense that if I'm burning fat, I'd want to do some zone 2 type work and capitalize on that. But what about even the other side of the equation, from a performance aspect? Have you queried some of that data? Hey, if I actually listen to this and my body says I'm using carbs right now, and I double down on that and I lift, I'm stronger, I'm faster, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. So, sorry, you wanted to answer?
No, go ahead.
Many of our users, the ones that more interest in proving that athletic performance or to build muscles. So by measuring what type of fuel their body is using before the workout, so they take a measurement before the workout, and by seeing if they're burning mostly carbs, so they know, and we give them the recommendation, this is a good time to do a high intensity workout. And if they're burning mostly fat, so this is a good time to optimizing that state. Or if sometimes now I'm about to do a high intensity workout. So to tell someone, don't do that and do something else. So sometimes people are so used to do a specific workout. So in that moment, we just recommend for them to consume more carbs in order to support the workout and avoid muscle breakdown. So for athletic performance, I have to say this is the measurement that I'm using the most. I'm breathe before the workout to understand how should I fuel myself properly.
Totally. No, that's fascinating. And what about even post-workout? Because I remember from the old ketogenic days that there's sort of a wave after a workout where you continue to kind of burn carbs for a little while, even after anything like high intensity. You sort of have this wave, post-exercise where you're still oxidizing or utilizing carbs a little bit more. And then slowly comes down. What kind of data are you seeing on that? How long is that curve? How long does this post-exercise kind of oxygen consumption continue? And is that measurable?
Mm-hmm. Of course, it's measurable. It really depends. It depends not only the intensity, but also the duration. And of course, how fit you are. So we have data. I have to say that I didn't get into final conclusion because there are many variables. Okay, because it really depends. If I'm going to do this exercise and I have, for example, 30 minutes of, high intensity, for me it's high intensity, but for example, for Michali, it probably would not consider to be high intensity because she's much fitter than I am and smarter. It was a joke. I know. Think so. But you are able to see very, very coherent is that there is this shift into carbs, but the decline into fat depends, again, on the intensity and the duration and on who you are, in a sense. And we are still gathering data exactly to get this, to finalize it.
I want to add, by having measuring after the workout, so based on the shift between the pre-workout breath and the post-workout breath, if you see that now you shifted much more into carb burn, it means that the intensity of the workout was very high. So it can give you insight on how you should fuel yourself in order to best recover from the workout. So after a high intensity workout, or when you also after weightlifting, you would expect it to see that shift. So it means that you should consume carbs and protein in order to have a proper recovery. Versus if I will see a shift toward fat burn, for example, I started the workout with 80% of carbs and I finish burning mainly only 30% of carbs. It means that during the workout, I depleted my glycogen stores and now I'm not in a recovery state. It means that the intensity of the workout wasn't that high. So now I don't need to consume now more carbs in order to support my recovery. I can enjoy the glycogen depletion and to maximize my fat burn versus the previous scenario that I mentioned.
And it also it still depends, even not between users, but also within, because every day our metabolism is changing, right? Definitely in women who experience regular monthly cycle, since every day our metabolism is changing, so our reaction to even the same exercise can change. And the fact, I think, that one of the things that we are unable to see to get into a final conclusion is because of this. We still don't have all the variables. So of course we are able to see, that depends on the intensity and duration, but also within the individual it's also changing. So, for example, we went again from Tel Aviv to here and we are in completely jet lag. And today I did a workout, the same workout I do every time, 10K on the treadmill. I felt was exhausted. Why? Because there's a lot of things, and when you look in the data, you don't always have all of these. But if you measure it,
and it makes me wonder if you're able to sort of measure your parasympathetic state versus your sympathetic state. And if you can get down to that much of a granular detail, right? Like, I mean, because when it's like in a fasted state, I guess there's some nuance there, because in a fasted state, you technically are probably in a more sympathetic tone. However, because you're in a depleted state, that sympathetic tone is driving more hormone-sensitive lipase and ultimately fat burning. But if you weren't in a fasted state and you essentially had the presence of insulin and cortisol simultaneously, then you're probably in a carb oxidizing state, which I'm just kind of working through it, which would probably not be exactly advantageous for body composition. Because that's my understanding that's like cortisol is fine. Cortisol is all fine and dandy, but when cortisol and insulin are both simultaneously high, that's when it's problematic. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
I don't know what to tell you. I wish I could. Yeah, but it's a great question.
Yeah, it seems as though, in that fasted state, I guess the more sympathetic you are, the more sympathetic tone you are, the higher your rate of, fat burning is going to be.
I think what's cool that the fact that you are able to measure your metabolism, like you end the end of the funnel.
Yeah.
So this is like the bottom line. This is what happened. Now what you're asking is great. And I really don't know the answer.
But I want to add to that. I think I mentioned it earlier. I went to Vipassana for 5 days, not only a weekend. It was 5 days, and it's because I'm measuring my metabolism on a daily basis. As you mentioned, during fasting and resting, my parasympathetic system should be the one that control, and I all the time burn carbs. I found myself all the time I'm burning carbs. I was so stressed at work. I couldn't sit with 2 minutes and relax and have a regular conversation, because my head, all my thoughts was all over. And after going back from the Vipassana, then first of all, I felt that my parasympathetic now control and my the sympathetic system is much more relaxed now. And now I'm able to burn more fat, what I was able before. And I can really feel it. I mean, I wish that someone could say to someone, look, you need a vacation. You need a vacation.
No exercise. Don't do like food log. Just
sit and
take a deep breath in
and look on a tree for 5 days. It was awesome.
You're preaching to the choir there. Being able to just, all right, take a day off. You're going to be okay. Same kind of thing. I mean, it's an interesting segue into carbohydrates and how that can drive, especially in an athlete, parasympathetic tone, right? It took me a long time to figure that out, that as someone that was, I was doing keto for like 9 years, and
keto, traditional keto, like 80% fat in your diet?
No, not like more of I was more like 40 to 50% protein, so high protein keto. So it was, I was very overweight before, so I lost weight with keto, and then I stayed on it for about 9 years. And I'm still very low carb. But what it took me a long time to figure out was that I would have better changes to my body composition by being able to manipulate my sympathetic tone by strategically having carbs at certain times, right? And sometimes that would be better for fat loss because I would be in such this chronically stressed state. And I mean, we have enough evidence to know now that, of course, especially in an athlete, carbohydrates can drive some serotonin response, right? So, and of course, for the large neutral amino acids and all that whole shebang. But it was very interesting to know that like something that I had quite frankly even demonized for so long was actually probably one of the bigger levers that I could pull to allow my body to get into the fat burning state better on those other days, right?
Amazing.
So I've become, as a result of that, like much bigger fan of like carbohydrate cycling when I need to. So I can induce a parasympathetic tone so that I can actually get something out of my fat burning and not just be redlining all the time, not able to relax. So.
I have another story. We have a big sister. She's 54.
No.
You're 50. How old she is? No, she celebrates 50.
She will hear you.
So she's challenging with her weight for 4 years, and for her, carbs are evil.
Yeah.
And she ate, the same as you. I mean, zero carbs. And in some point, I told her, but Yafit, maybe you should consume some carbs, especially in that age during premenopause and menopause. One of the main problems that women experience is changing in body composition, low energy, and they're not able to sleep properly. And the reason behind it is because they are become less insulin sensitive. So during the night, there are drops in blood glucose level, which even we don't feel it, but we are all the time wake up during the night. So one is it's taking us a lot of time until we fall asleep because cortisol is high. And when we are falling asleep, because the insulin, we are less insulin sensitive, so we all the time have those drop in blood glucose. We are not sleeping well. So I asked her, maybe you should consume carbs even before going to bed, like complex carbs with protein and fat in order to stabilize your blood glucose level. And her automatic response was, are you crazy? I said, just try. And she did, and it's worked amazingly. So sometimes, we think, wow, carbs are terrible, but we just need to know to manipulate the carbs. To manage it properly.
Yeah. And it's very also good to the mood. Like, really, I have 3 kids. One of the funniest fun stuff is on Tuesday, we order pizza, and it's fun, and it's part of the culture, and you go out with friends, and you want to drink beer. It's part, we want also, to live, and this, when we treat carbs as evil, I think it's also damage our social life.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, and I think being able to manipulate them, but understand also that these are an exogenous fuel source. I think the discussion that I like to have with people is they're not essential. You don't need them. Sure. Okay, let's get that off the table. That way everyone can
we will survive.
Put their arms down and you can realize like this isn't going to be a fight.
I'm not going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need them. They're not essential. But because that's what we face sometimes a lot of times with my community. I've got a very large low carb audience and quite a good portion of my audience that is not low carb. So sometimes the low carb side of my audience becomes very upset if I talk about carbs, right? So a lot of times you kind of address, if you put it out there, like, okay, yes, they're not essential. So no one's saying they're required. But if you know how to use them exogenously, I treat carbohydrates in some ways as like a supplement, right? So for exercise, they can be an endogenous or exogenous supplement. But also when it comes down to like, I have small kids too, 7 and 5, and I want to have ice cream. I want to have pizza. I want to do these things. But understanding how my metabolism works has given me so much more slack to know, okay, I know how I need to eat the next day. And that's not becoming orthorexic and obsessive. I think that's the problem that we have, especially in American culture, is the moment that you start to manipulate your diet, you're becoming too obsessive or orthorexic or obsessing over your diet. I mean, I just think it's things that we intuitively used to know, but we no longer know because we have distraction and we have so many things doing it for us. I think if you were to go back 100 years in time, I would imagine that there was probably innate feelings that you could feel when you're like, you know what, I probably shouldn't eat right now, or I'm probably burning more carbs, I have more energy.
Connect to your body needs.
Totally.
Yes, this is something that a bit disappeared lately.
Yes, it definitely has disappeared. Definitely has disappeared. So being able to, the carbs before bed is very counterintuitive because if you are a metabolically unhealthy person, then yeah, having carbs right before bed might be problematic, but we're talking 2 or 3 hours before, enough to increase that parasympathetic tone, increase some GABA, and get yourself to a state. And then if you do sleep, then your subsequent fat oxidation the next day is better. So look at this over the big picture, not just right in this moment.
Exactly. Yes, it's a matter of balance, I think, also.
The reason behind is really important, right? Because carbs, if you are all the time on full glycogen, so to reduce carbs, this is something that you should do. But if the problem is with your sleep and you're with the same as our sister, yes, that cortisol is so much high and she need that boost of serotonin, melatonin, and she need that. So for her, she should consume some carbs. Another population that is super interesting that should benefit also from carbs is women during their monthly cycle. We just published an amazing article that show how our metabolism is changing throughout the different phases of our lives.
We are the first one that were able to show that we actually have a metabolic cyclic pattern. Until Lumen, like all the time you used to see like they grouped 2 phases. So the pre-ovulation and post-ovulation, because this is like what traditional devices enable. But now we are able to see like all the spectrum, like from day 1 to 30 that women experience during their monthly cycle and how their metabolism is changing. It's amazing to see it. It's really like this going up, like
so what
a sinus.
What you said from the first phase of the monthly cycle, women tend to use more carbs versus the second phase when we tend to use more fat. So if in the first phase, when we tend to use more carbs, we avoiding carbs, we insert into that craving. Our body needs carbs, so that's what at the end of the day we're going to find our head in the fridge because we are going against our hormones. Yes, so in that phase we should consume small amount of carbs, complex carbs, in order to stabilize our blood glucose level and avoid those cravings. Versus at the second phase of our monthly cycle, when we tend to use more fat, this is an amazing period where you want to optimizing your ability to use fat. So intermittent fasting will be a great tool for that. So, and also here, I mean, when we are talking on a big population, this is the phenomenon, but each one of us is unique. So my metabolism is behave completely different from cycle to cycle, but still it's the way our metabolism is changing throughout the cycle. It's super interesting for me.
Do you find that, I mean, it's like carbohydrates are obviously like more demand driven in terms of like when our mitochondria uses carbs, right? It's a little bit more like, or not demand driven, more supply driven than demand driven, I think, but it's almost, I don't know, I guess you could say it's both, right? It's kind of interesting because if you look at, let me use an example, like gluconeogenesis, for example, is absolutely demand driven, right? It's demand, it's driven by, you're not going to break down amino acids or glycerol into glucose unless there's actually a demand. It's not like you're going to eat a bunch of protein, create a surplus. It doesn't work like that. There has to be a demand. Carbohydrates seem quite interesting because they're demand driven under exercise load, like when that's going to pull from glycogen, you're going to go that route. But they're also supply driven in the sense that if you provide yourself with a surplus of them, the cell will use them. It's not going to just be like, hey, if I were to go out and go for a walk at low intensity to oxidize fat, but I was simultaneously drinking a smoothie, I'm still going to oxidize some fat from the walk, but those carbohydrates are going to come on top, right? The question that I have is it the same with fats? So for example, like MCT oil is such a good example. Like there's, from a ketogenic perspective, yes, if someone is in a ketogenic state, yeah, you're going to see an increase in BHB if you guzzle some MCT oil just because it's going directly into the portal vein. But what about in a non-ketogenic state? Have you seen an increase in fat oxidation?
In MCT?
What's that?
While if you consume MCT?
MCT or any short chain fat, like ghee or butyrate or something like that too.
Yeah. I think if like taking like 10 years back, this is one of the experiments we did internally in the company. We said, okay, we're going to I provided you like a shake, now measure like your metabolism. And now we bought like MCT oil.
We did a little mistake with the calculation of the doses. We gave them too much MCT, so everyone went to the bathroom.
It was a
funny story.
Yeah, but they did oxidize fat. To your question.
So I mean, it's,
and went to the bathroom a lot.
And so it's great. It works for that too.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Did you do any co-administration of carbs and MCT together?
No.
That would be an interesting.
Yeah, I think you're interesting all with the nice combination.
You're taking the direction of the combination.
I mean, I don't think that it would do anything because I think the only way that you could create that sort of supraphysiological state is with exogenous ketones, really. Like you can't have the presence of insulin and be producing ketones or fat metabolism at the same time. So that would probably, I think insulin would trump all in that. But it's interesting, like, even if you're not in ketosis, but you're just after an overnight fast, you can increase fat oxidation with MCT. But then you have to ask the question, does it net out from a calorie perspective? Is it worth, the 100 calories you take in from MCT oil, is that going to be worth the additional X% you get in fat oxidation? Probably not, but maybe for brain energetics, it could be good, from that perspective. But, because you see a lot of people, bulletproof coffee is such a good example. Like, I have nothing against it. I do have some concerns with things like liquefying butter from a cryomicron perspective. Like, it seems like a great way to just rapidly absorb calories, but you see people that are trying to lose weight, and bulletproof coffee is sort of their weight loss thing. I mean, from a perspective of, yes, it might curb your appetite later on, that works, but it also seems like the juice isn't necessarily worth the squeeze. Like, you might oxidize more fat, but you're also talking a 400 calorie, drink, right?
Yes, I think it's, as you said, it's really depend on what you're trying to achieve. And sometimes, we are taking best practice from one area and we apply it for another area. Ketogenic diet is a good example, right? It was work amazingly for a diabetic person. But then when we are taking the traditional ketogenic diet with those 80% of fat, hardly eating any protein, 0 carbs, and now we apply it for another population that want to lose weight, it doesn't necessarily working for them. We need to adjust it, but people sometimes so used to get, what are the rules, what I need to do? What are the 1, 2, 3 I should do? They're looking for the easy explanation, but everything is so complex.
It truly is. And what would you say if someone's not using Lumen and they were just trying to identify when they're burning fats or carbs? Like, what are sort of the key indicators, if you could find any? Like, are there some things that people could look at, say, like, okay, what is a good indicator that you're maybe oxidizing more fat? Maybe it's just, the time, right? Obviously, if you wake up in the morning, there's a good chance you're oxidizing fat. If you're doing beta oxidation type zone 2, good chance you're oxidizing fat. Are there any other ones or any other signs that people can look for to say, like,
definitely. Yes, because, eventually, a healthy metabolism, right, as I mentioned before, is when you wake up in the morning, you burn up fat. It means that it gives you wake up with energy. When you wake up in the morning and you feel sluggish and you don't have that energy to start your day, it probably means that you are not wake up on fat burn state. It means that your mitochondria don't have that energy. If during, after lunchtime, right, we have those drop in energy, we sometimes feel or think it's mandatory. It's not mandatory, right? So in that area, it means that probably your mitochondria is not properly used the carbs that you ate. So by those subjective feelings, this is the way Merav and I worked when we try to optimize our metabolism during when we trained for the Ironman competition, and we didn't have Lumen. So it was all around subjective feeling. So how we wake up in the morning, what is our energy level, how craving we have, are we having experienced a good night's sleep, right? So if you are experiencing all those subjective in a good state, means that you are in a state of fat burn when you wake up in the morning. It means that your mitochondria is burning carbs after you ate carbs. It means that during long, low intensity, your mitochondria is able to use fat for fuel. So it's like those are the symptoms that we are experiencing. Did I answer your question?
No, that was good. I think it's really hard to, at the end of the day, it's very hard,
really,
right?
It's very hard because there's a lot of other factors, but I agree with you.
Well, and the more metabolically dysfunctional someone is, the harder it is too, right? There's, like you say, like when you were training for Ironman, you could go by feel. If you asked someone that has never worked out, or like, they're not going to be able, they just feel like crap all the time, right? They'll silly that. So it's like 50 shades of feeling like crap. Like, it's just tell me what it's going to be.
Also for us, working with feel, it was hard for us. We are coming from, from research, taking someone that is used to data and now manage the way we eat based on subjective feeling. It's like, okay, kill me and that's it. It's not working for me. Yeah. This is what motivated us to found Lumen, to bring the data into something that we felt we managed around feeling, and it was hard for us to use subjective data for that.
Yeah. It's you can get inside your head in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
It's definitely
how do I feel?
Just to kind of have a joke saying amongst I mean, it was sort of came out of the business world, not in the health world, but it applies in the health world. We always say, like, if you say, in God we trust, everything else give me data. Like, that was like, this is, like, it's not, you can't even trust your own subjective.
I have to remember that.
Yeah, you just can't trust. It sounds bad. You can't always trust yourself. Like, and most people are so far removed from, as I've gone like more well-versed in this, I'm understanding that there's a difference between like what your brain tells you and even your intuition, right? Like your true intuition, if you can turn this off, then sure, maybe you could tap into that. But 99.999% of people can't tap into that. They can't tap into that, the heart map that's telling them like, this is what you really should do. Because when you're an athlete, it's constantly being overridden by your ego and you're wanting to drive, right? I gotta be better. Oh, he's training harder than me. So I'm gonna fool myself into thinking I'm ready to train, but you're not. You shouldn't be training. You actually are, and it's like you're beat down, you're broken down. You shouldn't be training. So you can't actually trust yourself. It really sucks.
Yeah, we talked about this morning. I think one of the things of being an athlete is the ability to separate your mindset from the physiology of what you feel. Like you feel pain, and then you tell yourself, "No, everything is good. Everything keep going, keep going."
I enjoy that feeling.
Yeah, I think that's part of what if you went to train, especially in endurance, but not only. Then this is part of what you're being very, very good at, to separate between the two. There's
totally. Yeah. Oh, it's sometimes, and I bet you if you actually, kind of logged how you feel, like log your subjective feelings and overlaid that with data, you probably find that more often than not, you are right, but you're going to see that there are those anomalies, and I found that 80% of the time I'm right. I usually do have a decent pulse on it, right? Like, okay, everything in my body is telling me don't train today. So I train anyway and I get sick, right? Something like that.
Yes.
But
got
then
injured.
there are those situations where you're like, am I just stressed? And is this workout actually going to make me feel better? And there's a lot of times when I do that and walk away saying, I'm really glad I did it. Or it ends up being the best workout in UPR, and you walk in there feeling like total. So it's definitely wild how that works.
And you're not sure if it's it's because of poor motivation, and then should I just
I'm just so familiar with myself that I know that now I need to rest. I have that funny conversation with a friend of mine. I said, I don't know, is that something about the age that I'm with less motivation, or is there something about my age that I'm more connected to my body, that now I know that I need to I do nothing. I need to do nothing.
Well, sometimes that's the harder choice, right?
It's very funny.
It's like, what is actually harder, like going in and doing the workout or getting yourself to stop? And it's like choose really what is actually harder. A lot of times for me specifically, I know it's harder to not.
Yes.
It's definitely the easier thing to do is to go in and train, even though I'm in pain. That's definitely the easier thing.
This is the easier
That's
for
the easier
you.
thing to do. So
nice.
it's significantly harder to convince myself that I actually need to stop.
Take a stop.
And I think sometimes you do have to do that hard thing, and the hard thing is not doing the workout. You're convincing yourself, and your ego's convincing yourself that the workout is the hard thing. The real hard thing you need to do is actually just go for a walk. It's something like that. Well,
so how do you manage that? I mean, how do you know when is time that you need, to rest, and when it's time
lazy?
Unfortunately, it usually goes to my body forcing me to rest. Right? That's and I think in the endurance world, I think. I've done a number of ultras. I'm not a triathlete, but I've done a lot of ultras on the running side. And every time that I'm in that scope of training, those training blocks, it's invariable that you're just going to run until some kind of respiratory illness takes you down, because that's it's any endurance athlete, you guys know, that's what it's 6-7 times a year, like clockwork, you're going to get something. And it's so that was usually the indicator. It's really hard to predict. That's a very difficult thing to be able to predict. I've said that anecdotally, methylene blue has helped a lot with that. I feel like on longer training days, which is interesting. I haven't measured with lumen utilizing when you're but so that can kind of override that. So unfortunately, I do find that it just pushes my body, or something breaks.
Something.
Yeah, or it sounds like this is what happens.
But the sleep is probably the closest barometer for me. If it's like clockwork. If my sleep starts to get really broken, and I start waking up a lot, then I know I think overtraining is an overly used word. I don't think many of us are actually overtraining to the true like central nervous system fatigue that like they talk about. But I do think that early on, your sleep will tell you a lot about the trajectory of like, hey, it's time to back off. Like if you're constantly in that sympathetic tone. I also run into a problem of usually under eating a lot when my training volume is high. So I know those are two things, like when my training volume is high and I'm under eating, I don't sleep well. So then it's hard to tell, like, am I overtrained or am I under recovered? There's a fine line. I don't think we can train with a lot of volume as Ironman athletes. Like, that, like you can put a lot of volume in. It just, you have to maximize the recovery aspect, and that yin and yang has to kind of be there, right? Yeah.
Agree.
So for you, the signal is around how well you sleep, and then
and appetite's a good one too. I feel like appetite's a good one too. Like
I have good appetite all the time.
Yeah, see,
nothing can destroy my appetite.
You're eating all the time.
Yes.
I know.
You have to stop take pictures of me every time I eat. You take the camera and take picture
every 2 hours. It's like a baby.
That's awesome. Well, I'll link out, of course, to Lumen down below, of course, and use my code as well there. But where can everyone find you guys?
Lumen.
Okay.
So through the website, lumen.me.
Okay. Easy.
That's easy.
Yeah. Well, thank you all the way from Tel Aviv. That's a long.
Thank you. Wow, it was
a pleasure.
It was one
great endless.
One of really. I have so much fun. One of the amazing conversation I ever had. So thank you for that.
Really.
Thank you.
Really.